everyone, this is Murli from Ohana. Ohana basically means a family where no one is left behind. Basically एक ऐसा परिवार जहां हम सभी को हमेशा साथ लेके चलते हैं. I welcome you all to yet another episode of ours, wherein we would be discussing an important environment and ecology related topic, and that is embodied carbon, operational carbon, and how these two are related to carbon footprint, and why these issues are being highly debated and discussed all around the world today, and what relevance, significance do they hold for India. Okay, so before getting into the actual topic, let us first understand the basics. In the year 2021, in the month of November, the 26th Conference of Parties under the ambit of United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change took place, and the leaders from all over the world committed to achieve the target of limiting the global rise in temperature by 2 degrees Celsius at max. Along with this global commitment, leaders also pledged to achieve net zero emission target maximum by the year 2050 or 2060. India too this year joined this race, and our Prime Minister declared that India would be achieving this net zero emission target, or to say carbon neutrality target, by the year 2070. So what does this carbon neutrality exactly means? Carbon neutrality or net zero emissions depicts a situation or a scenario wherein the amount of carbon which is being emitted into the atmosphere is equivalent to the amount of carbon which is being absorbed back into the system from the atmosphere. For example, if at all I am emitting 2 units of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, then 2 units of carbon dioxide parallelly would be getting absorbed back into the system in one or the other form, so that the net balance of carbon dioxide which is in the atmosphere remains same. In other words, there is no extra addition of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So such a situation reflects net zero condition. Okay. So now we have understood the net zero emission condition. Let us now move forward. And it is in this respect only we need to understand the concept of embodied carbon and operational carbon as well. So in layman's term, if I were to explain embodied carbon, it can be understood as the amount of carbon dioxide which is emitted in the creation of infrastructure assets. Okay, for example, let us say if I were to construct my own house, then I would be needing bricks, I would be needing cement, I would be needing some concrete and mortars. So all these building materials would be produced somewhere. Some amount of raw materials would have been extracted from the earth, they might have been mined as well, then they might have gone through the whole manufacturing process, and then after manufacturing and processing they need to be transported back to my place, and then using these materials the house construction would take place. Now the amount of carbon dioxide which actually gets emitted in this whole process in the creation of infrastructure, my house here in this particular case, is known as the embodied carbon. Now coming on to the operational carbon, the amount of carbon dioxide which is emitted during the operation of the infrastructure. For example, my house in this case is known as operational carbon. For example, let us say once my house is constructed and I start living in it, I might be using ACs during the summers, I might be using refrigerators also, I might be using lifts in my building as well. So some amount of carbon might be or will exactly or surely be emitted into the atmosphere by the virtue of power which I am consuming. For example, as of today, approximately 60 to 70% of carbon dioxide is being emitted into the atmosphere from the thermal power plants. Alright, so the electricity which is being generated in those thermal power plants is being supplied to my house, and using that particular electricity, I am operating my assets in my house. So whatever energy is being consumed, that is responsible for emission of certain amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So whatever amount of carbon dioxide is getting emitted into the atmosphere is known as operational carbon dioxide. In other words, in order to operate my own livelihood in my own infrastructure in my own house, certain amount of carbon dioxide is getting emitted into the atmosphere. That amount of carbon dioxide I might not be aware of, and I might not be emitting at my own place itself, but yes, somewhere at some place I am committing to the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So that amount of carbon dioxide is known as operational carbon. I hope the picture is clear. Till this point we have discussed about net zero emissions or carbon neutrality. What does it mean by embodied carbon, and what does it mean by operational carbon? Now there is another concept, that is carbon footprint. For example, let us say if an individual is traveling from Mumbai to New Delhi today, then certain amount of carbon dioxide is also being emitted in this particular process or in this particular activity. If at all he is traveling by bus, let us say, if he is traveling by his own bike, if he is traveling by an aeroplane for that matter, then certain amount of carbon dioxide is being emitted into the atmosphere. So the amount of carbon dioxide or the equivalent of carbon which is being emitted into the atmosphere by the virtue of his movement from Mumbai to Delhi is known as carbon footprint. I hope I am able to convey what does carbon footprint actually means. Now let us connect the dots. The amount of embodied carbon, the amount of operational carbon which is being generated from the infrastructure sector, the sum total of these two contributes to a certain amount of carbon footprint towards the atmosphere. Now this particular carbon footprint needs to be controlled or brought down in order to achieve the target of net zero emissions, which has been declared by the countries all over the world and even by our own nation as well. Okay, so we have understood these basic concepts, but let us now move forward. Why this embodied carbon, operational carbon and carbon footprint has become relevant for India all of a sudden? Since we know that India has already declared to achieve the net zero emission target by the year 2070, it has become very much important that we start putting things, our practices in place so that we are well on the track of achieving our target. So in the field of deforestation, the government has done commendable job. In the field of transport sector also we are moving towards e-mobility. In the field of agriculture as well, the methane emissions from livestock, the methane emission from rice fields for that matter, all these issues are being monitored and taken into cognizance. But one important sector which is being missed heavily is the infrastructure sector, and it is this reason only the importance has been of huge significance. For example, let us say, as the government has already committed even in this year's budget that approximately 80 lakh new homes or houses would be created under the PM Awas Yojana. Last year also the government committed that approximately rupees 111 lakh crores worth of infrastructure project under the National Infrastructure Pipeline would be created in the coming years. Not only this, new initiatives like the Bharat Mala Pariyojana, Smart Cities Mission, etc. All these schemes and missions of the government are targeting the creation of infrastructure sector, right? And one more shift which is taking place is the migration of population from rural areas to urban areas. According to an estimate of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, approximately 50% of India's population would be living in urban areas at max by 2040. Now what does this mean basically? A greater population in urban areas would mean more requirement for residential places, more requirement for industrial units, more requirement for commercial places, more transport connectivity, more transport infrastructure as well. So all these shifts and movements, initiatives and plans are signifying a huge demand for infrastructure sector in the coming years, and it is this shift which has to be recognized by the government of India if at all we are aiming at achieving the net zero emissions by the year 2070. No doubt other initiatives which I just mentioned about in the field of which are being taken in the field of agriculture, transport, economy, deforestation, all those things, they would certainly contribute towards our effort, but this major chunk can surely not be left, or they cannot be ignored at all. So the picture is clear. Another important point which needs a mention over here is that in comparison to the developed world, we have not been able to develop our infrastructure at the same pace as the developed world has been able to do. But this provides a window of opportunity for us. But how is it possible? Let us understand this. According to few research, in the developed world, approximately 80 to 90% of their infrastructure is already existing. So the amount of carbon, I mean the embodied carbon, which might have been curtailed, is already emitted into the atmosphere. Second, the extent of operational carbon which might be getting emitted into the atmosphere might also be very high. And apart from that, if at all they try to reduce the overall carbon emissions from the infrastructure sector, they have two options. One is to invest more in new technologies or go in for retrofitting, and that would call in for huge financial investment. But in case of India, approximately 80 to 90% of our infrastructure sector is yet to be developed, and that is where we have an added advantage. If at all the government of India is able to pursue this path of lower carbon emissions by taking into account new innovative means of lessening the embodied carbon or operational carbon for that matter, we would be very much aligned towards our target of achieving net zero emissions by 2070. Another important point which needs a mention here is that the government has already started taking various initiatives. For example, India has become the very first country which has come up with India Cooling Action Plan. Now, what does that plan mean? The plan basically aims at reducing the cooling requirements in the infrastructure sector. For example, if we recall, last year the government announced the creation of infrastructure sector, specifically which is related to the agricultural domain. For example, creation of cold houses, warehouses, cold storage chains for that matter. Now all these infrastructures require huge amount of cooling, right? So the electricity consumption which would have been required in this cooling process is what the government will be targeting at. If at all we are able to reduce the power consumption or the cooling requirement itself, the amount of operational carbon which would be emitted into the atmosphere will certainly come down. So that is how the government has started looking into the issues of operational carbon at least. Now coming on to the another aspect, the government has already decided that a certain amount of our rooftop solar installations would be in the form of rooftop installations. So that rooftop installation will again help us in reducing our overall operational carbon. Now these are the initiatives which the government has already taken in place, and that is a great achievement and great move as well. Apart from that, new innovative mechanisms, policies and framework would also be required. For example, if I were to mention, recently a group of researchers from IIT Madras have come up with a very innovative mechanism wherein they have utilized gypsum, which is basically a fertilizer waste, for creating concrete slabs, and the technology is known as glass fiber reinforced technology. This particular technology, in simple terms, utilizes the waste gypsum from the fertilizer industry and uses it in creation of concrete slabs, and those slabs are very much resilient and they can be used in for creation of housing floors. For example, they can be an alternative to the tiles which we use in our homes. So that kind of innovation and that kind of initiatives need to be scaled up, and the government of India needs to invest heavily in such innovative measures. So it will have an outlier advantage as well. For example, the agriculture sector waste, or to say the industrial sector waste, can be used in for creation of assets or raw materials for the infrastructure sector. And by doing this, what we will be doing is, at one end we would be reducing the waste as well, on the other hand we would be reducing the embodied carbon as well. Now that is a major achievement which the government can focus at and which can be very much easily obtained as well. The proof of concept is already there. The only thing which we need to have now is the scalability prospect in place. So that is what the government can aim at now. Apart from this, a major important growth which would happen is in the green skills development. The government can parallelly build up on the green skills, and the individuals can also rope in their talent and contribute towards this target of achieving net zero target by the year 2070. So this is how the whole cycle can move on and help India achieve the target. I hope all the dots have been connected. I started from basically explaining what does it mean by net zero emission and how it is related to embodied carbon and operational carbon, how these two are related to carbon footprint, and how carbon footprint can help us achieve the net zero target. And in order to achieve this net zero target, what are the prospects which are available to India in the current scenario, and what the government can do to achieve this particular target, what are our plus points where we exceed from others, and what are the areas which we need to focus upon. I hope the topic is very much clear to you, and if at all, if there is any query or any doubt, please feel free to post them, and also do provide your valuable feedback as well. That would help us improve a lot. So till then, thank you and Jai Hind.